So, in an act of escalation, the U.S. has now seized an Iranian oil tanker. Let's get into that.
All right, what's going on, everyone? So, pretty significant escalation in the U.S. Iran war just a few moments ago when it looked like we might be headed towards another round of peace talks. Instead, the U.S. Navy opened fire and hit an Iranian
Well, I at least have been saying that no, we're not heading towards more peace talks. We're heading towards escalation in this war.
vessel that was trying to bypass the U.S. blockade, landed Marines on board that ship, and has since taken it into U.S. custody. Now, this is a tactic that we've talked about and advocated for on this channel, saying, hey, if Iran is going to have selective passage through the Strait of Hormuz, effectively shut it down to anyone.
Yes, might have been a good tactic to implement day one of the war, but we didn't have the ships in the region to do it. So it took us 6 weeks to get Navy Marine ships in the region that could seize tankers. So that was bad planning on our part.
One except who they want to either pay the toll or want to allow pass. One option we have is to seize any of the ships coming out the other side. It looks like we did that, and now we wait kind of on pins and needles to see how Iran responds, because
Iran doesn't really need to respond. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. We've taken one ship. It's not worth breaking the ceasefire for one ship unless we do more. But it is an escalation, and it eliminates any chance of the Strait of Hormuz opening anytime soon. That's the real effect of this. Because right now, Iran was saying, if you're not lifting the blockade, we won't open the Strait of Hormuz. And the United States' response to that is to take over an Iranian tanker ship. So, Strait of Hormuz are not opening. Let's go into where we are just about with this war.
For the ceasefire that has now been agreed between Israel and the Lebanese government, which in effect means Israel and the Hezbollah movement in Lebanon. Anyway, it is now clear that that ceasefire is now rapidly breaking down. We have
So the ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel is breaking down, which, of course, another reason why the Strait of Hormuz are not going to be opening.
not yet seen a return to armed conflict, but it's worth remembering that the time of the original 2-week ceasefire agreed by the United States and Iran through Pakistani mediation, which resulted in the failed talks.
And those 2 weeks have allowed the United States to restock its inventory of precision weapons, of standoff weapons that can be shot from a distance without risking planes going deep into Iranian airspace. So we've restocked that during these 2 weeks, and we're ready to go for round 2 of the war, even more intense than before.
In Islamabad, that ceasefire is due to end on Tuesday. As of now, there is no sign that the ceasefire is going to be extended. The Iranians have reimposed tight controls over the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians apparently did fire warning shots at 2 tankers, which were prepared.
There was like a period of a couple of hours after 4 p.m. yesterday where ships were transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. It was semi-open, like there was actual traffic through the strait. Then the IRGC fired on ships or warning shots, and that shut down the strait. And it was because the United States refuses to lift its blockade on Iranian ships,
Preparing to transit
as well as the other statements Trump has made.
the Strait of Hormuz on the way to India. And, well, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, yesterday apparently called a meeting of the group within the White House that is coordinating response to this conflict. And all of the usual people who we have heard about so much in this conflict in the United States. The President himself, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, Pete Hegseth, the US War Secretary or Defense Secretary, whichever it is.
I will say that the war, changing it to Department of War, was, some things Trump does are just stupid. And yes, it's should be the Department of Defense. It should not be us, United States, going out to war. We defend our interests. We defend our soil, our sovereignty. It should not be Department of War. That's just stupid.
The Vice President, J.D. Vance, who is, of course, now also, in theory at least,
And it makes me constantly make mistakes of saying Secretary of Defense instead of Secretary of War, and it's annoying.
the US's chief negotiator, Susie Wiles, the chief of staff. Anyway, they were all in on this meeting. What the meeting did is very difficult. Decided it's very difficult.
And every other country on Earth has secretaries of defense, not war. So it's doubly painful.
say. There's no visible action at the moment. There are reports circulating that the United States is prepared to seize ships connected to Iran anywhere in the world.
And it already has seized one ship.
Just say that could be ships carrying Iranian oil that are steaming towards China and which are already in the Indian Ocean, or perhaps even, dare I say it, the East or South China Seas, where the United States Navy does have a presence. Or it could be other ships doing.
I don't think it'll be that close to China because that's just needlessly provocative towards China. And the last thing the United States needs is China entering this war.
Other things, well, we'll soon have to wait and see. For the record, I suspect it will be the first, and we will come to the implications of that shortly. Anyway, that is the situation at the present time. There continues to be immense amount of recriminations about what has gone wrong. As far as I am concerned, there is little doubt as to this. It's clear that the Iranians had been insisting on a ceasefire in Lebanon before they took any step to relax passage through the Strait of Hormuz.
That they were very clear on that, and it took Trump 10 days to get that.
Last week, it appeared that a ceasefire in Lebanon had been agreed. The Iranians did then take certain steps to relax.
Yes, for a brief period, the traffic in the Strait of Hormuz there were ships moving about. Here, this is side tracks it live. See this big empty area? That's how it's been for like the past 7 weeks since the closure of Strait of Hormuz. But at 4 a.m. yesterday, there were ships. There were lots of ships going back and forth through here. They had not completely, but there was traffic going through the Strait of Hormuz.
Passage through the Strait of Hormuz, but everything fell apart for one reason, and one reason alone, which is that the President of the United States made a whole series of statements which, as far as I was concerned, were obviously wrong. He said that Iran had agreed to hand over its entire enriched uranium stockpile to.
He never agreed to that. And when you have Trump making statements like this, of course they're going to close the Strait of Hormuz again, because that's the easiest way to tell Trump to shut up. Your statements are bullshit. Also, the underlying reason was we wouldn't lift the blockade of Iranian ships. And it made no sense for Iran to open up the Strait of Hormuz during the ceasefire if the United States was going to continue to blockade Iranian ships. Like, the only one who can't go through the straits are Iranian ships? Iran says no.
To the United States, and that Iran would allow unrestricted passage through the Strait of Hormuz, but that in return, the United States would not lift its blockade of Iran. It would still continue to blockade Iranian ports. In effect, since there are actually no US ships close to Iranian ports, that the United States would restrict Iran's overseas trade. So that was what was the proximate cause of the collapse of the agreement. And over the course of today, Iranian officials have been denying that there is any imminent meeting between the United States and Iran.
So there's not any future negotiations even happening.
Prepared or due to take place on Monday. So going, for example, to the Tasnim news agency, which is widely believed to be close in some respects to the IRGC, there are reports, it says, that Speaker Ghalibaf rejects Trump's claims on Iran-US talks as false. The Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, who is, of course, Iran's.
And you have to remember, it was the U.S. that walked out on the last round of talks. At the end of the day, they just walked off, and Iranian side and Pakistani sides thought that talks would continue next day, but nope. U.S. packed up and left. And you're going to abandon the peace talks once, when it's convenient to you. Why would Iran just show up whenever you decide there's going to be talks? No. You stick with it from the beginning. You don't try to set up a new round of talks, day 10 or 11 of the ceasefire out of a 14-day ceasefire. You keep the talks going as long as you need to get some type of agreement if you're serious. There should have talks should have continued.
Chief negotiator said that the president has made 7 claims in 1 hour, all of which are false, and these include claims.
7 claims in 1 hour, and all of them false.
That Iran and the United States.
That's Trump's wishful thinking. He's deluded himself into thinking he's winning this war because that's what he needs. That's the only way he survives politically. And his ego can't take any other outcome. his ego can't take his presidency becoming failing and him becoming a lame duck, not even 2 years into his presidency.
Are about to resume negotiations again. So at the present time, as of today, we are in a complete impasse. There is no sign that the two sides are coming closer together. The comments of the president, the US president, about Iranian concessions has undermined trust and has thrown us back into a position where the Iranians are exercising extremely tight control of the Strait of Hormuz. And various people are speculating in Russia, and I will come shortly to certain.
Yeah, the Russians think this is the whole war in Iran is just going to escalate to a new level in a day or two.
Other interesting comments by the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, but also people who are very familiar with the situation in Iran, people like the British commentator, Alistair Crook, who is, of course, a former senior British diplomat, someone who knows Iran very well, and who has strong connections and contacts in Iran itself. Anyway, Alistair Crook.
Anyway, let's move on.
No one has told us the truth from the beginning of this operation until now. We've never had a truthful picture of what we have and have not accomplished. We've had to listen to the little Air Force 4-star stand there like an accountant reading from a spreadsheet and tell us, we have attacked 7,000 targets, we have hit every target, and we have been successful, and we have accomplished all of the assigned tasks. That's like saying, well, the patient over here who's terminal, we cut off his left leg, we patched him up near his heart, and we're very successful. Obviously, in the meantime, the patient is dead. But nobody bothers to mention that. You didn't tell us.
Well, yes, the U.S. lost this war the moment it bombed Iran's supreme leader. It wasn't prepared for what came next.
Keep the patient alive. You told us to operate, so we operated. This is stupid. This is counterproductive. This is insane. It will come to nothing. But President Trump doesn't want to suffer the humiliation of admitting that we've done all that we can do. Military force is now no longer the right answer, and we're going to take a different approach. And we are going, in the meantime, to...
He can't. Politically, he can't. It would. He's been saying for 7 weeks now that we're winning this. We're winning so much, so bigly. He can't just turn around and say, "Oh, actually, we lost the Iran war, and we're going to have to give Iran most of what it wants, and our demands are we have to throw that in the trash bin." And yeah, we didn't accomplish anything I set out to in this Iran war, and now you're going to have higher gas prices. There'll be a food crisis next year, and a lot of other things are going to suck in the economy, and we did it all for nothing. How do you think that'd go down with the American people? Not too well, especially with the midterms months away. So he can't do that. He has to just delude himself, delude the world, to thinking that, yeah, we're winning this Iran war. And he'll do that until some reality finally cracks a bubble and he can't pretend anymore. Most of the oil infrastructure in the Gulf going up in flames might be that event.
Disengage our forces from the current conflict. We are going to look to other mediaries, others who are willing to help us to negotiate a more favorable outcome than we can get on our own. That's humiliating for him. He can't do it. A great man can do it. He can't do it. This is the product of Roy Cohn. Everybody should look up Roy Cohn, who was his mentor. C-O-H-N, first name Roy. That man was one of the most evil, despicable human beings on the face of the earth. And he imparted his wisdom to President Trump, and President Trump has lived by it. And one of his rules was never admit anything. Never admit defeat. Say you were successful when you weren't.
Yep, this is I don't know this guy, but yeah, that is exactly what Trump is doing.
Say that you're in charge when you're not. In other words,
fake it until you make it, basically. And yes, that's what Trump is trying to do with the Iran war. Now, fake it until you make it can work in some circumstances if you actually have the ability to turn the fiction into reality. If you don't have any realistic means to make the false claim into reality, then it's just a disaster.
In other words, never ever behave truthfully towards anyone. Because if you admit defeat in any way, shape, or form, if you admit that you weren't able to accomplish something, the rest of the world will destroy you. That's his philosophy. His philosophy is straight from Roy Cohn. And that's why we're not going to see any change.
But the problem with that is, though, you can't sustain this. You can't sustain it in the Gulf. You can't sustain it with our air power. And more importantly, we're going to get to this in a minute with the economic.
That's the problem with fake it until you make it. If you can't make it, if the ability to make it is not possible, then just fake it till you're exposed as a fraud. That's what it becomes.
Impacts of all this, we can't sustain it with our economy, the price of gas, and all the things that go on along with that. So something is going to have to give here. And we really can't talk
What are
about
you
this
calling it?
portion without talking about the elephant in the room, and that is the Israeli side. We showed a soundbite yesterday of Benjamin Netanyahu, I think on Monday, declaring openly that he got a report from J.D. Vance while he was involved in these negotiations, and that he said he gets daily briefings from the national security folks in the White House. So, I mean, by all accounts, he's the one who's calling the shots here. And President Trump, and I just cannot for the life of me understand why he allowed, first of all, even before this started, with the agreement they got for the ceasefire negotiated by the Pakistanis, who said that a ceasefire in 11 was absolutely a non-negotiable part of it, which of course the Israelis to today still continue to violate it to make sure that everybody knows that it's not President Trump that's in charge, but it's Benjamin Netanyahu. And if he didn't want a ceasefire, he won't. Where do we go from here if that maintains its power over our White House?
First, I would urge everyone to go back and watch the portion of the Republican National Convention before the election in 2024, where an Israeli flag, an enormous Israeli flag, was plastered on the wall behind the speakers, and there was a sign that said Israel first. And a representative from AIPAC or one of those organizations walked out, took his position up behind the podium and said, Israel first. And he says,
I didn't watch the Republican National Convention, so I'm going to assume this is true. It sounds absurd enough to be true. And yeah, Israel's influence is outsized and completely unwarranted.
that's what we want. And the crowd was kind of confused. Some people sat there and said, what is this? There were sort of the occasional claps, and then there was kind of a stunned silence. You have to take people at their word. You have to pay attention to what people do. So people should have gotten the message right then and there.
Yeah, but Trump also conveys several messages at the same time, like no new forever wars was one of the messages he clearly conveyed, and he stuck by in his first term. And you can't blame people for believing that message, since its actions speak louder than words. In the first term, with no new wars, that cements Trump's reputation as a no-war president, which he completely betrayed in his second term.
That we are headed into a new kind of American administration, one that treats Israel and its interests and the interests of its agents in the United States as preeminent, as essentially supreme and superior to all other interests of the United States. They do this by insisting that the interests of the Israelis and their agents in the United States and dominance of the Middle East to establish their supremacy, that interest is identical to our own. Well, we all know that's not true, but not very many people took that seriously. So that's the first part. The second part is that at some point, since President Trump...
Yeah, I will admit, right up into Trump launched this Iran war, I never thought he'd be that foolish. I thought that the 12-day war, he did something, then he walked away. I think he tried to do something that I didn't think he'd fuck over his entire presidency with one stupid decision. I didn't. I thought there must be someone smart enough around him to explain, they'll close the Strait of Hormuz and you're fucked if you do this. There should have at least been one person that did that. That person maybe could have been Charlie Kirk if he'd lived.
Trump is turning out to be unsuccessful in accomplishing all of the objectives that he was assigned by the Israel lobby and its agents in the United States as Zionist billionaires. It may turn out that President Trump is more of a liability than an asset. If he can't get it done and he can't bring down Iran, if he can't destroy this state, well, then I guess we'll have to move on to someone else. And I think that could happen because the Congress, remember, is, with very few exceptions, just as much beholden to the Israel lobby.
Yeah, Congress didn't push back at all. Congress could have tried to stop this at any point of time, either before or after. It never did.
And its donors, as it is to anything else. So you don't see or listen to or hear very many objections from people on the Hill to what President Trump is doing.
Thing is, Israel and the Israeli lobby is one vector, the U.S. deep state. That means let's say the CIA centered in Treasury, that really runs things and orchestrates things behind the scenes. Israeli lobby is one vector that they influence our democracy through and achieve the ends of the deep state. The reason Israel's lobby is so powerful and outside is because it's not just Israel. It's Israel plus the deep state, plus the CIA, basically. And the influence built up by the CIA over the decades. And yeah, because the CIA doesn't interact directly with the public. It interacts through fronts like Israel. And so that's why Israel has such an outsized influence. And Israel, in turn, does further the goals of the U.S. empire, U.S. hegemony, the dollarization of the world. It plays its role in that. It also has its own interests, like Greater Israel, etc., and that's sort of like the deal between Israel and the deep state. They help us prop up the dollar and do the petrodollar, keep all the Gulf, the sultans of the Middle East, selling everything in dollars, investing everything in the U.S. dollar to fund our deficit. And in exchange, we send arms and support to Israel so they can be our power projection in the region and keep those undemocratic Gulf states in line. Except, just like the deep states, ventures everywhere are failing now because we're reaching the end of the U.S. empire. And like the Ukraine war is going terribly and Russia's winning. And this Iran war we were losing control of the Middle East, and this Iran war was our attempt to reimpose U.S. dominance on the Middle East and not have Iran sell its oil in other currencies, and it is failing.
Doing. Oh, they'll attack him for anything you can think of, for being a member of the Epstein class, for declaring bankruptcy 6 times in his life, whatever. But the bottom line is they're not objecting to this because they've been paid to be silent and go along. But if the Zionist billionaires tell their friends on the Hill that it's time for a change, then I suspect we could see J.D. Vance become president. The problem with J.D. Vance, of course, is no change. You're still dealing with someone who is very much in the grip of the lobby and the Zionist billionaires. Now, perhaps...
don't think Israel will abandon Trump because I don't think Vance is as pro-Israel as Trump. So I think those reports of Vance not being happy with this Iran war are true. I do think that doesn't matter for him politically. He's going down anyway. He's too tied to Trump. But I do believe that he was not entirely convinced by Benjamin Netanyahu. So I don't think Israel is going to abandon Trump, but I do think Trump is going to get steamrolled by this Iran war, the political fallout from it. And I don't think there's anything Israel can do to save him.
Perhaps if he gets there, he could prove us wrong. But there's not much evidence right now to suggest that he isn't, because remember, you could not join this administration. You could not be on the ticket. You could not be part of the cabinet unless you signed on for Israel first. When you have a system that you've set up, that doesn't mean that you have to pass muster with President Trump per se.
Yeah, when Trump went along with this and did this deal with the Israeli lobby, I don't think he ever realized that it would destroy his presidency and his legacy, which it has with this Iran war.
But you have someone like Larry Ellison determining whether or not someone should or should not be Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, we call it war now, and World War II nostalgia, or any of the other key cabinet posts. You know that you've lost control of your government. This is no longer an American government. It belongs to the people with the money who are Israel firsters. What are you doing with a White House chief of staff, Susie Wiles, who was actually on a campaign advisor in Israel for Netanyahu? It's very strange stuff. You know, there was a time in this country when people were very, very, very sensitive to foreign influence. One of the reasons that we set up the Constitution the way we did and stipulated that someone had to be born in the United States, could not be born on foreign soil and become president of the United States, was because of Alexander Hamilton. People didn't trust him because they knew that he was privately very pro-British. We just fought a revolution to dislodge the Brits, to divorce ourselves from the British Empire. Why would we want a man like Alexander Hamilton in the presidency? This is something it's not entirely new, but it really is new in the sense that the government is not in the hands of Americans, acting exclusively, primarily in the interests of the...
No, the U.S. government hasn't acted exclusively and primarily in the interests of the American people in a long, long time.
The United States and the American people.
Well, and let's look at the ramifications of what you described. I mean, anyone who's willing to look honestly can't possibly come to any other conclusion because just based on the actions. I mean, you can even just keep it narrowly from these negotiations in. There was a great chance for President Trump to get some kind of face-saving deal in Islamabad. The Iranian side was willing to cooperate with him as long as they got some things they wanted. We threw that in the trash. And one has to ask the question, why? I think you just answered it. But now we have to look at the ramifications of that. And there's a lot of financial implications of that. Let me just take a look at a couple. You've mentioned both in Asia and in Europe. Here's one from Asia. This is from the Korean Jungan Daily. they're already warning about that they may have to expand vehicle rationing to private sector if fuel prices continue to rise. And this was 2 weeks ago, so the situation continues to get worse there. And as you were telling actually Gary and I this morning, there's some issues going on in Ireland too, to where it's already rising to some really big issues with these fuel costs. And there's
Yeah, now we're in the period where it hits. All the last oil tankers that left the Persian Gulf before this conflict have arrived at their ports. Now is where the oil shock goes into full force. You're going to see gas prices continue to rise in the United States and around the world, and you're going to see physical shortages in some places. It's going to be bad.
a lot of protests going on.
Well, I think it's very important to watch what's happening in Ireland. I would say that if you're a European or an American, Ireland is the canary in the coal mine. Now, why do I say or American? There are people in the United States who don't understand that oil is a fungible commodity. That simply because we have a great deal of oil in the United States, that the price of oil will remain low. That's not true. And if this goes forward, as I think it will, to a failure of
It will take export restrictions by the Trump administration, which he will do going into the midterms, because that's a desperate step to try to save Republicans, and it will fail. Because there's nothing, the economy is one of the biggest deciding factors in elections. And the economy wasn't even great before this. Now that with the Iran war and the fallout from that, yeah, Republicans are fucked.
ceasefire and eventual renewal of the war on Iran, I think what you're going to see is a precipitous rise in fuel prices here in the United States. And diesel is a huge problem, not just in Ireland, but across Europe, because they have a particular type of diesel that is being mandated by the European Union that depends very heavily on urea. And that particular component is something that comes out of the Persian Gulf in great quantities. If you can't get it, then you have to use regular diesel. But the problem is all the trucks are fitted with catalytic converters designed to use fuel that is based on urea. Now, I encourage everybody who's watching this, go look this up. But if you're an Irishman and you own a truck and your living depends upon the use of that truck to deliver goods for you to be paid, and you can't drive it, that's it. That's the end. You lose everything. You have no income. I don't know if you have a mortgage on your house or not, but you still have to pay somebody somewhere to rent a place. So suddenly you can't rent anything. Nothing else matters at this point. Then the next thing that you begin to feel the pinch from is the absence of all the foodstuffs that you would normally receive, because those foodstuffs are not arriving in the same quantity or the same quality that they once did. In other words,
the food stuff, that it will really hit next year after, because of fertilizer shortages right now. Fall harvest will be much smaller than normal. And this time next year, when food prices will explode.
the supply chains you're accustomed to begin to break down. Now, Ireland is a very good place to watch because it's small. Things happen there, and their repercussions are felt everywhere far more quickly. And to all of this must be added something else. And this is something else that we've discussed in the past, I think. They have an enormous number of foreigners in the country that the vast majority of the Irish do not want in the country, do not like in the country, and would like to expel. Now, suddenly, you have these foreigners who are competing for the same things the Irish population wants and needs, which leads you as an Irishman to say, wait a minute, who are you? Where are you from? What are you doing here? You're from a country 5,000, 6,000, 2,000 miles away, and you act as though you own it, that you have a right to be in my country. That's when things get very ugly. That's when internal unrest races out of control. And at some point, Irish soldiers and Irish policemen who are trying to maintain order are going to have to make a decision. Whom do I protect? On whose side do I stand? Do I stand with the Irish, which is what I am, or am I going to run around and try to protect foreigners? This is why in 1929, 30, and 31, Herbert Hoover, as president of the United States, deported 9 million Mexicans. He didn't deport them because he disliked them. He deported them for the following reasons. Number one, most of them were holding jobs that were now.
Yes. This whole immigration thing is, as Miguel mentions it, and I agree that it's going to get bad. The domestic populations are going to turn against foreigners as the economy collapses and fuel prices. Yeah, it's entirely self-inflicted when you allow out of control migration. You divide your countries between those born there and the foreigners that aren't assimilating. And when you have distinct groups like that, you have conflict.
Needed by Americans. Number two, he knew that if he did not get them out of the United States, they could become objects of violence. In other words, they could be the recipients of what I just described potentially happening in Ireland. In fact, I think it's already begun. And he didn't want to see that. So he said, send them home. When things get better, they want to come back legally, we can make that work. But right now, we can't tolerate this. Americans need those jobs. So watch Ireland, watch carefully across all of the sectors in that country. That's the microcosm. You're going to see it happen eventually in France, in Germany, in
Globalists will try to prevent this as much as they can, but they're losing control.
the North European countries, especially in Italy, Spain. All of these countries are dealing with huge numbers of people inside the country who are not native to the country. They are not indigenous. They are, in most cases, not even citizens. This is a big problem. So let's watch and see what happens there, because at some point when things get tight here, we're going to see something similar here in the United States. But last point here.
Sure.
Everyone listening to this, like you and I, we have all lived in a period of unequaled abundance. We grew up in a world where there was abundance of everything, abundance of food, abundance of heat, abundance of housing. That's changing. We're moving from abundance to scarcity. We've only just started. It's going to get worse.
It's going to get worse. I thought that it would be a dollar collapse that sparked this shortage of, at least this lack of abundance in America. But I guess it's going to be this Iran war that causes it and then maybe leads to the dollar collapse. It worsens it.
How are we going to deal with that? And I think that's what President Trump ought to be thinking about. Not Iran and not Israel's national security interests, whatever they may be. Israel is going to have to take care of Israel's interests. We have to take care of ours. And we, like the Europeans, need to get rapidly out of this war, put an end to it, and try to restore normalcy as quickly as possible. If he cannot do that, if he can't bring himself to do that, then he should resign and let someone else come in to do it, because that's what we need right now.
Well, I certainly couldn't argue any of that because I mean, just the contours are all over the place. We just talked about them. I mean, we can't sustain our missile fire. We didn't even talk about that today. But you know, with our interceptor missiles, the PAC-3s, the THAADs, with our offensive missiles, the JASSMs and the Tomahawks, and it's just wear and tear on our aircraft. I mean, you just can't do that for an extended period.
Yeah, we're running out of ammunition at a fast rate, and if we escalate this, we'll run out even faster. We won't. By the end of this, we won't be prepared at all to deal like someone like China. They go after this Taiwan.
Time and the same thing on the ship crews, et cetera. But then we can't break it because the geography of Iran, the way the strait is set up, all those things you just mentioned there, all these are unsustainable. And yet, instead of coming to the conclusion you just talked about, the only thing that makes any rational sense, we're keeping going down this other path here that's unsustainable and unattainable. And I just can't see how it's going to have any end other than some bad end that you're talking about here, because wishful thinking and spin won't last when you hit that harsh reality you just described. Where do you see this going here from now? I mean, how much longer can this fiction last at the administration level?
Well, given the complacency in Washington, and you see some of it on Wall Street, people on Wall Street don't understand what's going on. They have no idea.
Oh, yeah.
They think that what we've witnessed in the oil markets, the petroleum markets.
Yeah. Wall Street is completely disconnected from reality. It's a lot of time, if not all the time.
Are anomalies. This is not a new permanent condition. So they don't understand this transition from abundance to scarcity. Eventually, they'll figure it out. And eventually, you'll see the stock market crash as confidence dissipates. And it's really enduring confidence in the government, in the president.
A crashing stock market, another reason Republicans are going to lose the midterms.
That is sort of keeping the enemy at the gates, at least in an illusory sense. Because President Trump comes on and says, oh, I don't think this will last too much.
And just like in the 2008 financial crisis, one event spirals into another. Like, once the stock market crashes, then you're going to find out that there's a pension crisis, and that all these pensions now that are completely underwater. They're most of them are borderline underwater already. But once the stock market goes down, they'll be absolutely underwater, and it'll become a crisis. But that's hidden from us because the stock market hasn't crashed yet. And you're going to have banks some way or another through our banks have exposure to the stock market through brokers. They do loans to brokerage funds. If a brokerage fund gets into trouble and goes under, it can bring down a bank with it. And so a crashing stock market can create all types of chaos in the financial sector because of dangers of brokers going down and dragging other institutions with them. It's contagion is what it's often called.
Longer. This should be over in a few days, or this should be over in a week or two, certainly by the end of April. Well, I've got news for you. If you're going to end this thing, you're going to have to do it, Mr. President, because everybody else isn't going to cry uncle. Forget it. Iran is there to stay.
During the Iraq-Iran war, Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons against Iran. Killed between estimates between like 200,000 and 400,000 Iranians died to these chemical weapons. That didn't make Iran give in. Do you think there's anything the United States could do that is worse than using chemical weapons and killing 200,000 plus Iranians, civilians? No, there's nothing we can do that's worse than that. And so there's no way, except nuclear weapons. Let's hope that it never gets there. But except for that, there is nothing we can do that has any chance of making Iranians surrender and for Trump to get his victory conditions. That's why we're so fucked.
You picked a core civilizational state with 93 million people. They will not surrender, nor should they, and nor should we be attacking them. So let's get the hell out of this right now. It's not where we should be. He needs to do that. But again, Roy Cohn's rules for life that he adopted make that an impossibility. So if he can't do it, then somebody else has to step up and do it.
Yeah, for him, it's not just having his legacy ruined and going down as a failure as a president, so which would be terrible enough for someone with Trump's ego. He also has the threats of what the Democrats will do, because Democrats have shown they use lawfare against him in horrendous ways, like 34 felonies off of the action of his lawyer did to bribe a hooker without his knowledge. That's insane, and other stuff like that. And so if he loses power, it might just not just be he retires, lives his life quietly. No, the Democrats will not allow that. So it's practically suicide for him to admit defeat in this Iran war. I think he views it that way.
Because the entire global energy system and the supporting economies are all at high risk of destruction if he doesn't stop.
And you just said it there that President Trump keeps saying, it'll be over by the end of the month.
Also, Trump is vindictive. If he is going down, might as well take the world with him.
Or whatever, and you see, based on his words here, this is the price of oil. It's now gone down below $100. It's continued on the words that he said here. You saw that headline that Gary just showed you about the banks are saying, yeah, don't worry about it, everything's fine. We're resilient. It's not going to be a problem, and that makes people think, oh, okay, cool. And then they'll listen to Jack Keane, they'll listen to Lindsey Graham, they'll listen to Mike Pompeo.
Going back to 2008 financial crisis, go to the early part of that crisis and look at the statements of leaders, whatever, in the banking world or in the government. And everyone's telling you, it's all fine, it's all fine, it's all fine. Believe us, it's all fine. Government will never admit that something is wrong until they're forced to. And Trump has not been forced to admit this Iran war is going wrong, at least not yet.
And then they're not going to be concerned about anything. But I mean, in a certain sense, I think you can argue that these positive headlines here are actually dangerous for us and are going to lead us into the very areas of make it more likely we get into this era of scarcity that you just described, as opposed to less likely.
They maintain the illusion. And as long as the optics are good, President Trump is happy, but the optics are not going to get you through this. We're in a real trouble right now. It reminds me again of Thomas Mellon. He was the Secretary of the Treasury in 1929. And in June of 1929, he gave a famous speech and told everyone, we live in a period or an era of unbroken prosperity. Everything is fine. And what was he doing at the time? He was liquidating all of his stock holdings, converting everything that he could into gold and cash, and getting out.
Yep. That's typical. Yep. Everything is fine while selling everything behind the scenes and making quick exit before shit hits the fan.
Of all the markets. And here was the Secretary of the Treasury who was doing that, telling everyone to relax. Things are just fine. They're not. And I'm telling everybody the same thing right now. So we'll see. I still hope that President Trump will see himself as first and foremost the president of the United States and recognize that he has his obligation to shelter, to protect, and feed the United States and its people first.
Let's certainly hope that because the alternative is pretty dark, and I hope we don't have to find out. I'd hate to see the Ireland microcosm turn into our bigger problem here, but I think that's out there if we don't heed some of your warnings here. But thank you very much for coming on today, Doug. We always really appreciate it.
I like this title: "War with Iran is a failure of imagination." The U.S. and Israel are fighting a war they do not understand and cannot win, and they did not prepare for. It's part of that, the failure of imagination. You had to have a plan for the closure of Strait of Hormuz, period. And you had to have, valid, understandable objectives. Like regime change obviously was never something that they could accomplish. and it didn't make the negotiations easier. So why did we start this war? Yeah, so stupid. On that note, just thought this was funny and depressing and worth sharing.
A new Turkish threat is emerging. I want to be very clear. Turkey and Qatar have gained influence in Syria, are seeking influence elsewhere and everywhere throughout the region. And from here, I warn, Turkey is the new Iran.
A lot of people were predicting this, that after Iran, it wouldn't be over. The Middle East wouldn't be safe after you go after Iran. There was still Turkey. I mean, if Israel wants complete dominance over the region, then of course it also has to take out Turkey, because Turkey is as big and as powerful as Iran, and it is the one country right next to his borders that could still threaten Israel. So of course, once Iran is gone, Turkey is next on the chopping block. And I thought it was funny seeing the leader of Israel's opposition starting to paint this narrative. They're already looking ahead to the future. Israel, always forward thinking. Turkey, this huge thing here, same size as nearly as Iran, and yep. So after Iran, Turkey is next. I think that Israel is going to fail with Iran, so that's one good news for Turkey.
Israeli politician Naftali Bennett, the guy who's supposed to be the opposition to Netanyahu, well, he was kind enough to let his pay pigs here in the United States know which war Israel's going to drag us into next.
Yep. And fun fact, Turkey is part of NATO. So that's another reason it's going to be really interesting when Israel tries to go after Turkey. Well, it might never happen because I don't think they're going to succeed with Iran. So Iran's still going to be #1 target. But it's just, that goes to show you, if they had been successful in Iran, Turkey was next. It's never enough. The greater Israel, by the way, is all this area right here. This whole region right here. A lot of countries in that area. So I think that's going to do it for my Iran section for today. We're still at the same place we've been for the last few days, which is this ceasefire holding pattern before another big round of escalations. And next week's the fireworks will start. Because I see no hope for any negotiations, which I don't even know if there's any negotiations planned. According to the Iranians, there's no negotiations that are going to happen. So, yep. Whether we'll have the ceasefire will even last till Wednesday, I doubt it. I think Trump and Israel just like attacking during negotiations and ceasefires, so they'll probably do that sometime in the next 48 hours. Anyway, like and subscribe, come watch on Kick or Twitch, and I'll see you next video. Bye!